One day, God spoke to Jonah and said, "Travel to Nineveh and tell them about me." Jonah said, "No way," and jumped on a ship going the other way. God sent a mighty storm to stop him. Jonah told the crew what he had done, and they tossed him overboard. A whale swallowed him up, and Jonah said, "I'm sorry, Lord." And after 3 days, the whale spit him out again.
Wait, that's in the Bible?
Yeah, there's tons of stories that you might not expect in the Bible.
Like what? Like, isn't it all just one big long sermon?
Well, there was a guy that fell asleep and fell out of a window because one sermon went on so long.
Well, are there any miracles?
Yeah, Jesus turned water into a special party drink once.
Talking donkeys?
Yep. It's all in there. Pretty cool, right?
All right, good morning once again. Welcome to Christ Church, Church of Uplifting Lives, elevating Christ to church for those who aren't here yet. I'm Pastor Andrew. I'm glad that you guys are here this morning, joining us in worship today, being part of our community. Thank you. Good morning, of course, to everybody who's joining us online and everybody who's over in the West Auditorium. Thanks for being here, part of Christ Church today. We're in this sermon series right now, and it's kind of a fun, bizarre, kind of fun sermon series to do. We're recognizing that in the Bible, there are a host of really weird, bizarre, and sometimes even surprising and funny stories in the Bible. The Bible is rather intimidating on the outset. When you look at the Bible, it can be this big-looking book. It's actually a collection of books and a collection of stories and different types of writings. And what's wonderful about it is as you begin to tease it out and begin looking at it, you find all these rich and wonderful insights and these beautiful moments in the Bible. And yet, as you're reading it, you might also stumble upon some stories that are just weird. They're bizarre, they're hard to relate to, they don't make any sense. And so what we're trying to do as a church is acknowledge the fact that, yeah, there's some funky stuff in there, but let's slow down, let's look at a few, let's take a handful of these weird stories out and begin to see the ways in which God is actually working through some of these rather weird, bizarre, sometimes even funny circumstances and stories to teach us about ourselves, to teach us about Himself, God, and to teach us about our world and our relationship to each other, our relationship to Him, what it looks like to be a Christian person. So that's what we're doing again this morning. So today, the next story that you probably didn't know that was in the Bible, it's kind of a weird and bizarre story, comes to us from the first part of the Bible, from what we often call the Old Testament, the Jewish part of the Bible. It comes to us from a book specifically called 1 Samuel, and we're going to be looking at chapters 5 and chapters 6, and it's about something referred to as the Ark of the Covenant. What in the world is the Ark of the Covenant? It's really important. We're going to spend some time trying to help you understand the significance of what this is and what specifically this piece of furniture is. The Ark of the Covenant is a piece of furniture that was God asked Moses to build during the time in which the Jewish people were really becoming a nation and really understanding what it meant to be defined as God's people. And God said, look, I want you to build this box, and I want you to put some rings on it and put some rods through it, and wherever this piece of furniture, this Ark of the Covenant goes, I want you to know that I will attach myself to that Ark of the Covenant. So wherever it goes, I promise that I will go too. So that when you are worried or concerned, and as you're living out your lives and you want to have a sense of my presence and my power and my person, you can look at the Ark of the Covenant and you can know I am with you. I am there in the midst of it. And so the Ark of the Covenant became the most holy relic, most holy object in all of Judaism. When they did church and they did worship together, they would worship with the Ark of the Covenant as the most holy of places and spaces. They would gather around it in the tabernacle and so forth. They would travel with it from place to place, and it would often lead the people. When they were a nomadic tribe and they would journey, it would be carried by a bunch of priests who would lead the way as a way of showing how God is leading His people. And the Ark of the Covenant represented that. It's been made famous by artists trying to capture a sense of its significance. It was something that had these golden cherubim on top of it. It was overlaid and very ornate and beautiful. And it was this really, really significant piece of furniture, the Ark of the Covenant. It was perhaps, though, made most famous in our contemporary culture. Some of you might have already encountered the Ark of the Covenant in a famous movie. Anyone know this movie? Raiders of the Lost Ark? All right, okay, you guys got that right away. All right, I had to fact check myself this morning. Anyone know what year that came out in? We're going to age ourselves. Sorry. 81. And it is, just in case you're wondering, for those of you who don't know what this movie is, it is the first Indiana Jones movie. Harrison Ford, George Lucas, epic, all right? And it's all about finding the Ark of the Covenant. That's what it's about. So the Ark of the Covenant is this hugely famous, hugely important part of the Jewish faith, the Jewish tradition, and it even creeps into our contemporary culture. One of the other things and more significant things that they would do as a way of showing God's presence and God's powers anytime the Jewish people were having a skirmish or a battle, as a way of showing that God is there and God is helping to fight the battle with them. The Jewish people would often bring the Ark of the Covenant with them into battle. They would march it up with the priests, and then the soldiers and the people would take heart that their God was with them as they faced the enemy. And the hope and the idea and the theology, the belief behind it is that not only do people fight our battles, but God fights for us. God fights on our behalf. And so that was actually a common practice in the Jewish tradition. And this was going well. This Jewish nation was getting established, and there were multiple tribes, and there's the ark, and people have a sense of God's power and presence, and there's this longer arc of what the Bible is describing. And then all of a sudden, something odd happens, something weird. A weird story occurs because the Ark of the Covenant goes to battle and they lose. So what happens is there are some corrupt priests who are all about greed, all about taking power. They're nasty dudes, right? And they're the generals of this army, of Jewish army. And because they're priests, they do some wheeling and dealing, and they say, hey, let's bring the Ark of the Covenant with us to help rally the troops and all this sort of stuff. And we're going to go out and we're going to fight this battle. And God does not like these two generals, does not like these two priests. In fact, he predicts and promises that they're going to fail. But they ignore him, and they ignore anything that has to do with God, and they use their position to put God's people and the ark in a place of danger. And in fact, they lose the battle. The news is so significant that the generals, the priests, they get killed, and news comes back to the Israelites saying, we lost the battle, the general priests died, and the Ark of the Covenant, God's physical manifestation of his presence and power that we have built our entire nation and culture around, has now been captured by enemy forces, by the Philistines. To show how significant this is, one of the wives of one of the generals, the wife of one of the generals who died, goes into shock at hearing her husband has died. She goes into labor, but her greatest concern, she actually dies in childbirth, and her last words don't have to do with her husband. They have to do with the Ark of the Covenant. She says, the glory of God, the glory and the presence and the power of Yahweh, the Jewish God, has departed from his people, from Israel. Why? How? Because the Ark of God has been captured. This absolutely rocks the Jewish people. I mean, in their theology, there's this idea that God is all powerful and his glory and his majesty, and he's been fighting the battles with them and for them, and then all of a sudden they lose. And if the Jewish people lost, then that must also mean God lost. If the Jewish people were defeated, that must mean that their God was defeated. And it rocked them to the core. And it was all because the Ark of the Covenant had been captured. That's all the backdrop to our weird story. You ready for the weird story now? Things get really funky. Here we go. All right. It has to do with what happens to the Ark of the Covenant once it's been captured. After the Philistines, that's the enemy forces, the Philistines, after the Philistines had captured the Ark of God, they took it from the battleground at Ebenezer to this town of Ashdod. They carried the Ark of God into the temple of Dagon, which would have been one of their gods, and placed it beside an idol or statue of Dagon. Now, Dagon is like a merman. They would have been on the Mediterranean border, like think King Triton here, okay? They were worshiping basically King Triton. They were a seafaring people. He was a fertility god, half man, half mermaid man. He's a merman. Okay? And that's what they worshipped. They worshipped this guy, right? And the idea was that once you conquered, you would bring to your God a sacrifice or an acknowledgement that your God is stronger than whoever you beat. So what they do is they bring the Ark of the Covenant to their temple, to Dagon, and they place it in front of Dagon, and they're like, check it out! Look at this, we beat Israel. You, Dagon, are stronger and bigger and more powerful than the God of Israel. You brought us victory over this impotent, powerless, weak Yahweh God. You are bigger and greater and more powerful. Our God beat theirs, and here's the evidence. And so you would actually put it as kind of like a trophy. It's kind of like this trophy idea. They would bring it to the temple, and they put it in there as a trophy. So the Ark of the Covenant is being placed in front of Merman here as a trophy. But when the citizens of Ashdod went to see it in the morning, Dagon had fallen with his face to the ground in front of the Ark of the Covenant, in the front of the Ark of the Lord. Guys, that's kind of funny. Like, you got to picture this in your head. Can you imagine, like, the priest on duty at that time? Like, the priest gets up, he's going to go have his morning cup of tea, he's walking by the temple, and he takes a peek in, he does the double take. Eyes pop out of his head because Merman is tipped over. He's fishtail in the air in front of the ark. That's hilarious. And so that makes him really nervous. What do we do? What do we do? What do we do? He fell over. I don't know. How did he fall over? I don't know. What's going on? So they run in there and they do what all people do with false idols. We're very quick to prop them back up again, right? And so they take Dagon and they put him back in his place because it would be really bad, right? By the way, we do this in our lives, do we not? When we see the weakness of our own false gods and false idols, things that we worship apart from our God, when we realize that they, in fact, are impotent and weak before the power of the one true God, in our frailty and our brokenness, we are so often quick to prop them right back up. So that's what the people of Ashdod do. They put the Mur guy back on the stage, okay, all right, and then they're good. Must have been a fluke. But then, the next morning, the same thing happens. I mean, God's got a sense of humor there. It even gets better. Watch this. Dagon had fallen face down before the ark of the Lord again. But this time, his head and his hands had broken off and were lying in the doorway. Only the trunk of the body was left intact. Just a fishtail. That's hilarious. You imagine how awkward that is for the people? And then on top of it, the Lord's heavy hand struck the people of Ashdod and nearby villages with plagues and tumors. I mean, these people are like, what is happening here? We thought we won. We thought we were victorious. This is our trophy. And all of a sudden, the God's falling over and he's breaking apart and busting up, and then everybody's getting sick and stuff. The people realize what happens. The people realize that maybe Yahweh is not defeated. Maybe he's not dead. And they cried out, we can't keep the ark of the God of Israel here any longer. He's against us. We're all going to be destroyed along with our God, Dagon. So they send out messengers. They gather together the rulers of Philistine towns. What are we supposed to do with this thing? Because apparently, he's not dead. We thought he was dead and defeated, but all this is happening. Well, the rulers discuss it, and they're like, okay, let's just move it. It's too good of a trophy to let go. Like, let's just move it. So they move it down to another city, to Gath. But when the ark reaches Gath, the Lord's heavy hand fell upon Gath's men, young and old. And God struck them with a plague of tumors. And then there's great panic. People are starting to freak out. So, what do? They're like, we don't want it. Send it on to the neighbors in Ekron. So they sent the ark of God to the town of Ekron. But when the people of Ekron saw it coming, I love this, they cried, we don't want it. That thing's going to kill us. Full stop. Don't bring it here. We don't want it. So the people summoned the rulers of Philistines together, and they said, look, get it out of here. Send it back. Please send the ark of God of Israel back to its own country, or it's going to kill us all. And so that's what they do. There's a mural here that was painted by the early church trying to depict this particular story. On the one side in the top corner, you can see the temple of Dagon, and a pantheon is essentially a bunch of gods would have been in there. Dagon would have been their chief god, if you will, for this particular situation. Below it, though, you see imagery of destruction. You see that things are falling apart. You see that there's panic, and there's this wave of when you're looking at this, you're supposed to be picking up on this sense of, wow, we are actually being defeated by the Ark of the Covenant. On the other side, you see some oxen here hitched to a wagon and some people here, and it's trying to represent what happens next in the biblical story. The Philistines decide to take the Ark of the Covenant and put it on a wagon. They hitch it to some oxen, whack them on the back of the rump, and try to get rid of the thing. And beautifully, the oxen beeline straight to the border. They go, you guys love maps. You always love maps. Here's a map for you this morning. I don't know why you guys like maps so much, but here you go. Here's another one. It's always a contest among us preachers, like, got a map this week? Okay, I do. Here's a map. All right, so the ark is in Shiloh originally. That's where the worship of God, that was like where the Yahweh temple would have been. It goes to battle in Ebenezer, and Ebenezer's where they fought the battle, and that's where they lost, right? And they lose that. And so then it crosses the border here. You can see that in the dashed line. It crosses the border and eventually makes its way down to Ashdod, and that's where the temple of Dagon would have been. And you can see how this is the Mediterranean Sea, would have been over on the one side here. This was all coastline. This is all coastline. And Ashdod is right near the coast. Then it moves to Gath, which is further south, and then again it moves farther up north to Ekron, and that's when they're like, no, we don't want it, get rid of it. And so what happens is it beelines straight over back into Israelite territory, and it's reclaimed by the Israelite people. It's reclaimed, it's welcomed back by the Israelite people, and that's it. Like, that's the story. It ends up hanging out there for a number of years just over the border until we hear again about the Ark of the Covenant picking up a number of chapters later by a famous experience by a guy named King David, where he brings the Ark of the Covenant finally to Jerusalem, and he dances before it, and there's this beautiful celebration because there is this moment in which they are celebrating God has returned to his people. That's the story, though, it's this weird, bizarre, freaky kind of story with relics and furniture and mermen and plagues, and it's in our holy scriptures. You read, tell me, like, if you sat down without any knowledge or context and you tried to read that, you'd be like, what is going on? And what am I supposed to get from this? Actually, it's absolutely packed with powerful and meaningful things. Most notably from the beginning, what do we do? And what does it feel like when evil wins. The Israelite people felt like evil had won. The Philistines won. And their God was weak and impotent and dead. And sometimes, I don't know about you, but sometimes that's the way my life feels too. Feels like I screw up, I've done something wrong. And when I screw up or I do something wrong, I often will project that onto God. And if my life gets messy, sometimes it's not because of anything even I've done, but things that have been done to me. I'm sure you've had that experience too. Where you look at your life and you look at your world and you think, wow, God, where are you? Why does it feel and look like evil is winning here? Why are you being defeated in this? Actually, in chapter 7, verse 2 of 1 Samuel, it says that the Israelite people felt abandoned. In Hebrew, it translates abandoned by God during this time. Where we struggle to see his presence and his power loose in our lives and in our world. Sometimes we all feel abandoned. And yet this story also echoes forward to the way the disciples felt when they watched Jesus die on the cross. For all intents and purposes, when the disciples of Jesus bore witness to his death on the cross, evil won. They felt abandoned. The living presence of the Almighty God, the Messiah who had come to save the world, who they had put their hope, their identity, their person. They had hitched their wagon to his rising star, and then he was crucified and killed. And the disciples felt like we sometimes feel, like evil had won in our world and in our lives. And yet, God was not dead. And in fact, God in his sovereignty, in his power, in his wisdom and his might, was very much alive, working and moving, even when we could not see it, even when we cannot feel it, working to be reunited with his people, to come back from the dead and save us, save you. And it's beautiful how this weird story about the Ark of the Covenant has the same pattern of how it looked like God had lost. And yet God works with this unrelenting commitment to be returned to his people, to join them and their lives again. And absolutely nothing was going to get in his way. Nothing was going to keep God from his people. That was true for the Ark of the Covenant. That was true for Jesus Christ. That means it's true for you as well. That no circumstance or situation in your life is going to keep God from you. He is committed to you and your life, to being with you, to being present, to heal and save and redeem. Doesn't mean that there aren't going to be times in your life where there are situations and circumstances where you feel abandoned, where you feel overwhelmed, and you feel like evil's going to win. But make no mistake, this weird, bizarre story, it teaches me and it teaches you that God is always committed to returning to you and working for your good. My daughters, you guys know I have 3 daughters. If you don't know, I have three little ones, and I've talked to you before about our bedtime routines. We do bedtime routines, and every night we do the same thing, and they choose books. And we've had a hot book lately. You guys know when you've read the same book like 30 times in a row? It's good. I like this book. This has been the hot book lately. I snuck it out of their rooms, so they're going to be looking for it this morning. But it's the book on The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. You guys ever heard of The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe by C.S. Lewis? A famous movie. I like to think it's famous. It was a movie. The book is certainly famous. Disney bought the rights and created a movie. This is the movie picture book with it, the movie storybook. And the girls love this book. They love this book. Except there's one page in here that we refer to as the yucky page. It's the yucky page. And they don't like it. You know why they don't like the yucky page? Because it looks like evil wins. In the book, the character Aslan, who's a lion and a Jesus messianic figure, gives his life up in sacrifice and is humiliated and killed. And at their young age, my girls feel uncomfortable in the yuckiness of that. And they know the yucky page. And they are always anxious to turn the page to the next one. Because in the next page, he comes back. And they're smiling and laughing. Because Dad, he came back. Yeah, he does. Nothing is going to keep Aslan from the people he loves. The same is true for your God. No power of hell, no scheme of man will ever keep God from you and your life. So, I encourage you in whatever story you're reading, whether it's weird or bizarre, look for the ways and listen for the ways in which God is drawing close to you. Because he has an unrelenting commitment to find his way into your life. Kind of cool that you can find that from this weird story. Amen, good? Let's pray together to close. Please pray with me. Gracious Lord, this day we give you thanks and praise that in your mercy and in your grace, you continue to draw close. Nothing, no power of hell, no scheme of man, no amount of defeat, not even death itself can keep you from your people. You are totally, utterly, and fully committed to us, being with us, loving us, encouraging us, doing life with us, breathing life into us. We confess to you that sometimes we screw up, we make mistakes, we struggle to see your presence and power. We sometimes feel so overwhelmed by the powers of this world or the situations that come against us. We get caught up in our grief, our shame, our guilt. We get caught up in broken relationships. And we can sometimes feel defeated. Perhaps even more, sometimes we feel like you are defeated. Grant us eyes of faith in those moments to know that you are still sovereign, you are still working, and you are always returning to us, your people. Give us hearts that welcome you back with celebration and joy, even as we turn back to you. We ask this, Jesus, in your name.